Hello everybody, I am recording this video to respond publicly to an interesting comment that I just found under the video about boredom, the first of the two videos that I made about boredom. So let's go through the comments together. It is written by Riverstud222. Isn't there a kind of conceptual incoherence in the idea that our emotions are there to tell us something? As if the self-consciousness of the I already existed prior to the evolution of the emotion. It is not a conceptual incoherence if we regard it as a metaphor, if we regard this as one way among many different ways of thinking about emotions. We are considering a person who is alone, sitting by themselves, engaged in an activity. Maybe they're doing work, maybe they're doing homework, maybe they're students, maybe they are they're doing a date with a potential romantic partner and they're feeling bored. And in that sense, they're alone with their emotion. So in that kind of context, I am proposing that it is useful to use the metaphor of something being communicated to self. You're right in pointing out the limitations of this metaphor. And for those of us who have been following the conversations about the tropics of discourse, the first one of them was with John David, the second one was with O.G. Rose. The main point in those discussions so far is that an unmediated and direct contact with reality is not possible. It is not reasonable to assume that we can have that kind of direct contact with reality. All we can have is a variety of different metaphors that mediate, metaphors and mental operations, cognitive capacities, categories, language, all these tools that we have, conceptual tools, experiential, empirical tools, they mediate, they connect us to reality. And since none of these metaphors, none of these instruments, conceptual tools and toolboxes are perfect, it is better, wiser, more useful, we have a better chance of succeeding, achieving a better understanding if we rely on a variety of tools, variety of metaphors. So again, I would agree with the comment here, that this metaphor of a signal to self as the only way of thinking about emotion would be very limited, especially in other contexts. So yeah, you're right. Let's continue. The comment is good because it offers an alternative way of thinking about emotions. I'm continuing the comment. Doesn't it make a lot more sense for emotions to be trying to communicate something not to me but to others? A child's emotions are not meant to communicate to them, they communicate to their parent. Yeah. So I believe this way of thinking about emotion has its origin in evolutionary biology and now more recently evolutionary psychology. Emotions are meant to, first and foremost, their original function, their first function is to communicate something to others who are in the same environment. That's why one of the reasons why emotions are involuntary and are difficult to suppress. If I'm experiencing an emotion, it will be difficult for me to control the overt signs of that emotion because presumably it will be beneficial for others to know about my experience, even against my own will. So this is not the end of the story. This connects to the arms race between the ability to hide our emotion and others' ability to read our emotions. So that arms race, part of that is our capacity for self-deception. A very interesting paper, a landmark paper by Robert Trivers, evolutionary biologist, was exactly about this, about the reason why we are capable of self-deception. We deceive ourselves because that's the most efficient way of deceiving others. And this is consistent with the way you are viewing emotions here. Emotions are, first, they are meant to communicate things to other people. But again, I would say, if we only accept this view of emotions, then we have to accept that if you're alone, if you're temporarily isolated from other people, then your emotions are useless. Should we accept that? I don't think so. I think that's the metaphor of communicating something to others. That's one useful way of thinking about emotions. Another occasionally useful way of thinking about emotions is that communicating something to self. Okay, let's continue. It seems to me, now the comment is turning a little bit negative here. It seems to me that only adults who close themselves off from the openness of relating to others would talk as if their emotions are meant to tell themselves something. Yeah, there is something here. There's something to what you're suggesting. But let's think this through. Do we want to be open to others all the time? Absolutely, in a sense that we would be completely vulnerable to being determined by other people. Anything that somebody around me or people around me are experiencing, I would be unconditionally joining the emotional experience of other people. I don't think I want to be absolutely open in that sense of having no boundaries between my emotional life and the emotional lives of others. So some openness is good. Some boundaries are good too. I think it is inevitable, it is reasonable to assume that we are, most of us, to some extent, closed off from being receptive to the emotions of others and being available to join the emotional experience of other people. And we want to preserve some of that gatekeeping, so to speak. All right, let's continue. This is the last part of the comment. The question about the relationship between, another person asked about the possible relationship between procrastination and boredom. And this comment is writing, that question points toward the reality of boredom, if you ask me. Sitting with boredom and telling oneself they are justified in neglecting their responsibilities are the same act. Sitting with it is the act that creates the boredom. So sitting is the reason why we are bored, according to this comment. It's not like that we feel bored while we are doing something, but I think it is possible. Many times we find ourselves feeling bored in the midst of an activity. It's not like we first sit somewhere and then we feel bored. That's an extreme Jamesian position with respect to the experience of boredom. YouTube binging is one way of applying the cream, and sitting with the feeling and feeling justified in neglecting responsibilities is either the same cream with a different color or a different cream that creates a different kind of sore. Nice flowery language. Just go do what you need to do and you won't feel bored in the first place. All right, I have a bit of a problem with that just language. Just go do it, or boredom is just this, and sitting with boredom is just that. This is something that I encourage other people, and I try myself as much as possible. I have a tendency to do this too, to say boredom is just that, or meditation is just that. If you sit somewhere and meditate on your boredom and do nothing, you are just doing, blah, 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 blah. It is a little bit dismissive, and it wants to kind of end the conversation about boredom by giving us a very simple, straightforward theory of boredom. That's not what I'm interested in. That's why I'm happy to receive your comment. You have written here an extensive comment, almost 300 words, a 300-word comment. You're engaging in a discussion about boredom. Is that right? Or am I wrong? You're engaging with your nice, helpful comment. You had that really good point about emotion having a social, communal role as opposed to an individual, personal role. So you are engaging with the conversation about boredom. So why is it that you think that this should be the last word? At least in my impression, you think that this is the end. This is a conversation ender. This is a contribution that is not just a contribution to an ongoing conversation. It's a comment that presents itself as sufficient as an end point, as a potential end point. If we really understand and get the point of your comment, we would be wise enough to stop talking about boredom. Just go do what you need to do. But what if the person we are talking with, I've had many times friends, students telling me that they don't know what they want to do. They don't know what they need to do. It requires sometimes a little bit of work. I was reminded of that nice little book, Soon. It's the title of it is Soon. It's about procrastination. It's called An Overdue History of Procrastination from Leonardo da Vinci and Darwin until You and Me. So if you read that book, it's a really nice historical treatment about procrastination one of the main things from that book is that procrastination is not one thing. It doesn't have one meaning. It should be explored. Sometimes it is a bad thing, as you said. Sometimes it just indicates that you're not taking up your responsibility. But other times, it should be explored. There are reasons why it is. If you look at the personal biography of Charles Darwin, who gave us this understanding of emotion that you're defending here. Charles Darwin, in his expression of emotions in Animals and Man, he was one of the biggest procrastinators in history. If you read that book, you will find out the history of procrastination. Darwin, one of our heroes, was a big procrastinator. So it is not as straightforward. I wish it was as straightforward, but it isn't. Again, I suggest, you don't have to, I would suggest, if you're interested in, check out a little bit check out our discussion on tropics of discourse and that book on the history of procrastination called Soon. I believe the name of the author is Andrew Santella. I have a review of it on my channel. I have a review of the book. I read and reviewed it a while ago, a few months ago. All right, thank you for your comment, and thank you for everybody else who's been listening and engaging and commenting, interacting with the content on this channel. I really appreciate it very much. I wish you all the best, and until next time.